Yeah. So ironically, because I had this big week, I made a better plan than I normally do. And I worked
Yeah.
out every morning. I drank enough water every day. I went to bed at a reasonable time every night.
Yeah.
And everything went smoothly.
And how did you make that plan? Like, what did you do?
I
What made it a better plan?
What made it a better plan? Well, likely the fact that this is the sixth time I'm doing this.
Okay,
But
fair.
last year was the crisis with my mom leading up to VORS. And so I set up these systems like slapdash of having my backup admins and the slot, in case, ready enough that if I don't show up, someone else can take over. And so basically this year, without the crisis, I had time to like, basically do all of that, but better. And so I had a backup admin for every single session. And because I had to provide everything to them, it
Mhm.
was all done and ready to go the week before.
So, because you asked for help and you structured it that you weren't the only person holding all the balls, you were able to do self-care during the busiest week of your year.
Year. Yeah. And I ended up holding all the balls, but but I had all of the backup plans. And so at the end of the week, I just thanked them for committing their time and
Yeah.
attention to it and for giving me peace of mind. They actually didn't have to do anything except while I was talking, let people in to the Zoom room. But
But you felt supported.
I did. I did. Yeah.
And so, like, you
Yeah.
know, and because you had to get it to the level of competency that you could hand it off to somebody else.
It
It
then made it easier for me. Yeah. And I think the thing that I did this year that was the very first time I've done this, which was immensely helpful, was on Sunday, I made a Monday through Friday list.
oh,
These are the things that have to happen on Monday. These are
right.
sending out the reminders to the speakers for the next day, thanking the speakers that just, were, that we just had, do whatever tiny little individual 2-minute thing was done.
So you could just check it off the list and make sure you're not losing a
That's
thread.
right. So I didn't have to keep any of this in my head and then wake up at 3 a.m. and be like, oh, did I say, that was just taken care of.
Yeah.
And I'd go over my list and I'd be like, and I actually got so ahead at one point that I scheduled emails for the next day
Yeah.
to just be like, oh, and now I'm ahead. It
Right.
was really great. And I also totally credit working out in the morning, right? So Charlie took Parker to doggy daycare both in the on Tuesday, both in the morning and in the picked him up. And I got done when he was out picking him up, and I went downstairs and I was like, oh, isn't this nice? I have none of these duties. So I made, so, we had thawed salmon. So I got salmon in the oven. I got all of this other stuff done and then sat down and I did no work in the evenings
What?
because I was so ahead. So yeah. So I
Oh,
wasn't like, oh my God, I have to prepare for whatever.
right.
It was just I'm kind of done.
So did you miss the adrenaline high?
No,
Was
no,
there an adrenaline high?
probably to some extent. I mean, just from being on. I mean, we
Yeah.
did 15 events in 5 days. 2 were
Yeah.
in person, and I emceed all of them.
Right.
I mean, I was I mean, you'll laugh, and I just laughed, right? No, I mean, things did not go perfectly. Mostly
Right.
they did, but the very first one, I misintroduced myself. Hysterical. So I had just said that it was the Vermont Organics Recycling Summit as part of International Compost Awareness Week. And I was Natasha Duarte, director of, and I started with international and I was like, nope. And then I went to Vermont coming. I'm like, no. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm the director of the Composting Association of Vermont. And I just kept going and laughed it off and was just like, I went downstairs and I was like, Charlie was like, how did the first session go? And I was like, perfect, except when it came to tell people who I am. What the hell? And then in my session, project session, one of the three farmers didn't show, and we kind of had to like shuffle, and there was a little bit of a miscue with some slides, but like it, I do all this prep, and then in the moment, these things roll right off.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think that I really just appreciate us recording this because like it's the hardest thing to talk about, like what self-care really means, right? And what I've observed, I don't know when you started really working out in earnest, but like you're like, I'm going to prioritize working out. And that just gives you a level of mental clarity. Right?
Yeah.
And so building up to this, you just had, I mean, as you described in a different podcast, like if you work out, then you're not crashing on the couch watching TV, like you just have a little more time. So that you could like really set this up well. And granted, I really appreciate you pointing out this is the sixth time you did that. And like, the first three is just like, like,
well, and it's the fourth time virtual.
Right.
The first two were in person, right? So that's a big difference too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
right.
yeah.
And but still, like there is value in repetition. And there's value in, I mean, I wish somebody would do a study on how much brain energy it takes to hold a billion details in your head versus writing it on a piece of paper and being like, here's my checkoff list.
Oh my God. It was beautiful. That was the new thing. And I will never do another event without having like a multi-day event without having this checklist.
You've never done a checklist? I mean, for all the international stuff, you must do checklists.
Oh, I do checklists, but not like this was day by day. And that was the difference. It wasn't like thank the speakers Monday, Tuesday, like it wasn't like I inverted it.
Right.
It wasn't by task. It was by day.
By day.
And this is honestly the first time I've done like a full comprehensive list by day. Yeah. And granted, it wasn't, I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
It wasn't that many things on a day, except for Wednesday got long. But that's because that was the day that we had our 2 in-person events. But so way more effective.
Yeah.
It wasn't like send thank yous with 5 check boxes for each day.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a storyboard, right?
Yeah.
Where you're almost like, here's every 15 minutes that what I would, because that's all we have. Like multitasking is a farce, like you can just simply say, until I get this task done, I'm doing this task. And until I get this task, I'm doing this task.
Well, and it wasn't quite that organized.
But in some ways, like, I mean, I'm hearing that you're like blocking it in time, in times, maybe not 15-minute increments, but like, I remember. Yeah.
And then I did watch some TV every night to like clear my brain to help me sleep. So it wasn't like work. I think really not working in the evenings helped. Yeah. Because often I'm not, like in the past, I wasn't necessarily feeling ready for the next day by the time the first day ended. Yeah. And so then I do work in the evening. Right. And then it was still in my head. Yeah. Like I feel like I did better. Like I feel like because I made such a commitment to self-care, I like maybe did better than I do when I don't have these multi-day events. Isn't that kind of crazy?
Let's say that one more time, just just like because it would be easy to pass by. What I just heard you say is you actually did better under a stressful conditions than you normally do under non-stressful conditions.
I think so. Like for an entire week? Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Because I was so, I think like we have all these tools, right? But we don't use them every day, which is totally fine and realistic. And that's just life. But because I was preparing for this just like demanding week, I like did my food prep on the weekends. I had my snacks organized. I made sure I had water with a straw and knew when I would be able to be off camera and be able to be drinking. You know what I mean? Like I had really thought through way more than I do on just a regular week.
Right.
How am I gonna, I mean, I've been working out every day for a few months again, but I didn't let it slip.
You didn't let it slip. And the other thing that I heard is because you're like, well, this isn't all the time, but you handed off some tasks to your husband, Charlie, to picking up the dog and to, like just so that you had just a little more bandwidth for this week. And then how did you feel on Saturday?
Saturday was the day I didn't work out. I took Saturday off. Isn't that funny? But I felt great. Like I felt good. I vegged out and I did some stuff around the house and I caught up on, but I was not wiped out. No.
And you haven't been wiped out.
And interesting why. So like I slept in until 7. So I've been getting up pretty much around 5:30. And on Saturday, I slept until Charlie got up again. Right. So my husband got up with the dog and dealt with all of that, closed the door, and I slept until 7. So like an extra hour and a half. And then I needed to eat.
Yeah.
So then at that point I was like, oh, I'll work out later. But then the day went about and I just didn't. And I'm like, I don't actually care. Like that is totally fine.
Yeah. No. And but the point is like, I think sometimes like there's a repetitive story when you go in, there's like a heroic story that gets built around big events. Like I have a billion things to do going up, right? And like all this drama building up, and then there's the drama of doing it and like being it, and then there's the exhaustion. And like I've talked to a lot of high level professionals like CEOs, judges, and there's this idea that for us to be doing good work, we have to put 100% of ourselves into those tasks, which means we're not eating, we're not sleeping, we're not taking care of ourselves. And what that does is it just depletes our power supply. So one, we're not as responsive. And when disasters happen, and like we can't respond. And then two, on the far end, we're so exhausted that if there's another crisis, we can't respond.
Right.
And okay, so you took a day off, but you didn't take a week off, and something cuts loose in your family dynamics. You're like, okay, well, here we are.
Yeah.
So to wrap this up into like, if you were telling yourself or your best friend who has a big project coming up, like what are your 5 takeaways be?
The first is to, even if, depending on what the project is, even if you're really going to end up doing it all yourself, prepare as if you were going to pass it off to someone else. And if possible, have someone available that you could pass some or all of it off to if you needed to. Because that like really helped me, which meant that I couldn't just do things last minute. Basically, right? There was no way the night before, there was no way in the evenings I was preparing for the next day because I
Right.
had to have it all done the week before, by the end of the week before.
Yeah.
And so prepare as though someone else was going to step in for you.
Right.
Recognize that, again, depending on what it is, it's probably just fine if someone does step in for you.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's like, I'm getting I mean, I like doing it this full week event because it's like a week of personal development for me. Like I'm genuinely interested in the program that I put together effectively. Right. So like
That's
fabulous.
a big tip on itself. If you're putting
Right.
something together, like see if you can make it what you're interested in.
Right. So like, I mean, it was varied, but I was like personally invested in it. But I've also really been like none of this needed me personally to be pulled off.
Yeah.
So like letting go of the ego that might be there is really helpful. And then making a day by day list, not a task group list, but a day by day list is helpful. And then doing like the day before or whenever before upfront food management.
Yeah.
And figuring out when you can reasonably get your movement in, like those things.
Yeah.
And in food, I would bring water.
Yeah.
Because I've been really working on staying well hydrated. Like
Yeah.
for me, that's like maybe not as important, but almost as important as food.
Yeah.
Like I find I do way better when I'm well hydrated.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.